It is Sunday, October 18th, 2020. Hopefully the title of this homily, Good Trouble, is a bit puzzling to you, but its meaning will be revealed a bit later. But first, let us examine the gospel reading a bit more closely. This is from Matthew 22, verses 15 to 22, the New Revised Standard Version. The Pharisees went and plotted to entrap him in what he said. Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not? But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, Why are you putting me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin used for the tax. And they brought him a denarius. Then he held it up and said to them, Whose head is this, and whose title? They answered, The emperor's. Then he said, Give therefore to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God things that are God's. When they heard this, they were amazed, and they left him and went away. It seems like it's a yes or no question. It should be simple, yet it was set up as a trap. If Jesus answers no, it will mean that he does not recognize the authority of the Roman government, which would be something that would be subject to death. If he says yes, Jesus is virtually saying that the Jewish people simply should passively accept the inevitable, yet again, of being ruled by a foreign power. So Jesus picks up this and asks them, and they seem to be saying that there is a civil authority to be obeyed and respected, and also God's law to be followed. And it's very easy just to separate them and do both, and be a good citizen of the Roman Empire and a good practicing Jew. It's sort of like that in the United States right now, where the supposedly clear separation of church and state, as envisioned by the founding fathers, today seems to be a little gray, a little fuzzy. And we have discovered painfully that it is easier said than done. Not really a clear and firm separation between the two powers. We can see this playing out in history. Look at this painting for a moment. Most of us will recognize it as a representation of Martin Luther, nailing his 95 theses on the doors of the Wittenberg Cathedral in 1517. An Augustinian monk, Luther simply wanted to reform the Catholic Church, which in his thought had gone astray in many ways, not the least of which was the way traveling clerics would exhort the peasants to give away their paltry earnings to fund the building of the Church of St. Peter in Rome. The reward? A place in heaven for themselves, or perhaps a departed loved one whose salvation might have been in doubt. And yet, a simple and controlled reform was not to be. Very soon afterwards, the Catholic Church and the civil authorities worked together to capture Luther so that they could try him and execute him. So he fled, went into hiding, and as we all know, the Protestant Reformation broke out from the walls of the Catholic Church and spread throughout that land. Then fast forward to Germany in World War II. The German shepherds were funded by the German churches were funded by the German government. So as Hitler rose to power, the vast majority of them simply toed the line, not wanting to lose their source of income or disrupt their lives. An exception was a German theologian, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. In this photo, we see an intelligent thoughtful, and very well-dressed scholar who started an underground seminary in opposition to the rise of Nazism. Initially, he was a strict pacifist, yet as the horrors of the Weimar Republic grew more and more and rose to the surface, he could be content no longer with pacifism, as long as Hitler was still alive. So he knew he had to go further to try to stop the evil steamroller of Hitler's regime as the horrors of the concentration camps began to leak out. So he joined his brother-in-law, Hans von Dolyani, who had a high rank in the German military, in the plot to assassinate Hitler. It failed, and the co-conspirators were sent to Flossenburg prison to await execution. Several months later, on August 9th, 1945, Bonhoeffer was led from his cell, stripped of all of his clothes, a stark contrast to the picture shown above, and taken out and led to the gallows to be hanged until he was dead. Less than a month later, Germany surrendered and the horrific war ended in Europe. Here is a picture of the book cover of one of his most famous books, The Cost of Discipleship. This cover shows a pastoral picture of Jesus sitting with his disciples and teaching them, with perhaps a stray sheep or two on the edge of this peaceful hillside. Actually, I couldn't find the cover of the later edition that I wanted to use, which has the title, but with a hangman's noose coming down, bisecting the title. I thought it was quite a bit more accurate and graphic. For Bonhoeffer, his persistent following of Jesus led to his hanging. His last words from the gallows, as still dignified even in his total stark nakedness, were, "This is the end for me, the beginning of eternal life." This photograph shown here memorializes the site where Bonhoeffer and others from the assassination plot were hanged, a stark reminder of the possible cost of discipleship. Then lastly, in our own country, we turn to two leaders of the civil rights movement in the 1960s, Martin Luther King and John Lewis. Here we see MLK on August 28, 1963, from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, where he gave his famous "I Have a Dream" talk. 5 years later, we flash forward to April 4th, 1968, to Memphis, and another balcony moments before. Here are some quotes from his previous letter from Birmingham jail. April 16th, 1963, a year before the Civil Rights Bill was passed, and 2 years before the Voting Rights Act was passed. I just picked out a few of the gems. He was accused of coming into another state rather than staying in his own, and he said to that, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." And then he went on to say, "We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality tied to a single garment of destiny." Justice too long delayed is justice denied, because they had actually been given in the Emancipation Proclamation of January 1st, 1863, that all Black males could vote. And yet right away during the following years, they were kept from voting, which finally led 100 years later to another one with the Voting Rights Act. And then he turned to his fellow ministers, like in Germany, where the German Lutheran Church was pretty much tied to the Hitler regime in order to keep its status and its money. He said directly to them from jail, the contemporary church is so often a weak, inefficient, uncertain sounding voice. It is so often the art supporter of the status quo. But the judgment of God is upon the church as never before. And I've just been mentioning really big names in history. I'm sure all of you have heard of them, and yet there are thousands and thousands and thousands of others who disrupted their safe and comfortable lives. And he said of them, others have marched with us down nameless streets of the South. They sat in with us at lunch counters and rode in with us on the Freedom Rides. They have languished in filthy, roach-infested jails, suffering the abuse of brutality of angry policemen who see them as dirty nigger lovers. Norman Rockwell is very well known as the painter of common American life. And yet Rockwell, beloved by millions, broke the mold of his usual subject in his paintings with this one, done in 1965, called Murder in Mississippi. Take a moment to dwell on this. The coloring is much more different. It's mostly in grays and browns and blacks. It's much more realistic. Look at the one man that is already dead, the other Negro holding on to the white man, looking his death squarely in the eyes while supporting him. Their names need to be said now too. James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner. These three men, two from the North, one from Mississippi, were working together in Freedom Summer in 1964 to travel from town to town, urging African Americans to register to vote. One night their car was followed. They were stopped, pulled into a field, and shot to death without ceremony. Their bodies were hauled away and buried, not to be found for months. The murder of these activists sparked national outrage and an extensive federal investigation. Outrage over these particular activists' disappearances and murder helped gain the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Now, to bring it back full circle, back to Jesus. Did he strictly observe the false draconian dichotomy of his using the denarius to see civil and religious laws totally separate and being very clear in that? Absolutely not. A few examples. He ate with sinners. He let his disciples harvest corn at the edge of the fields on Sabbath. Often he did not wash his hands before meals, not just a cleanliness thing, but a ritual observance that was strictly enforced. He cured many on the Sabbath, and even more, did not urge them to go to the temple afterwards to pay an offering. He overturned the money changers' table in the temple grounds, and he even dared to call himself the Son of God, a statement worthy of death, both in Jewish and Roman law. So were these discretions of his random? Could Jesus only do it? What were his criteria? We can find the answer in Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail. How can you advocate breaking some laws and obeying others? There are two types of laws. There are just laws and there are unjust laws. I would agree with St. Augustine, sidebar, the church father of the early 4th century in North Africa, that An unjust law is no law at all. Any law that uplifts human personality is just. Any law that disgraces human personality is unjust. So we've seen how Martin Luther, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Martin Luther King, the three freedom riders in Mississippi, and Jesus himself use those principles to fight for the higher laws, precedence always over civil law. And they did it at great personal cost. And lastly, John Lewis. He was a civil rights worker who frequently went with Martin Luther King on his walks. Later in 1987, he went on to become a Georgia member of the House of Representatives. He died in office earlier this year. His motto was good trouble, necessary trouble. He knew from personal experience. By his own account in the movie, Good Trouble, he was arrested 40 times before he was elected to the House of Representatives, and 5 times actually while a member of the House. So look at their lives. Look at your own. Look around. See where civil law and even church law is unjust, discriminatory, cruel. And you too make good trouble, necessary trouble. As I thought of a peace song to end this homily, the one that stood out above all others was Cat Stevens' Peace Train. In this metaphor, the peace train is not just wandering around in the desert like Moses did, with no certain timetable or destination, but is on tracks, the right track, heading from depot to depot, where it is picking up different groups of freedom fighters, from BLM, LGBT, Native Americans, those with disabilities, the poor, the incarcerated, and others. They may be on different cars, but they are linked together, heading to a place where all can be honored and respected. The train is pulling into your station now. Are you ready to get on board?
Now I've been happy lately, thinking about the good things to come, and I believe it could be something good has begun. Oh, I've been smiling lately, dreaming about the world as one, and I believe it could be someday it's going to come. 'Cause out on the edge of darkness, there rides the peace train. Oh, peace train, take this country, come take me home again. Now I've been smiling lately, thinking about the good things to come, and I believe it could be something good has begun. Oh, peace train sounding louder, ride on the peace train. Ooh, ooh. Come on, the peace train. It's peace train, holy roller. Everyone jump upon the peace train. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Come on, the peace train. Get your bags together. Go bring your good friends too, 'cause it's getting nearer. It soon will be with you. Come and join the living. It's not so far from you, and it's getting nearer. Soon it will all be true. Oh, peace train sounding louder. Ride on the peace train. Come on, the peace train, peace train. Now I've been crying lately, thinking about the world as it is. Why must we go on hating? Why can't we live in bliss? 'Cause out on the edge of darkness, train sounding louder. Ride on the peace train. Come on, the peace train. It's peace train, holy roller. Everyone jump on the peace train. Ooh. Yes, come on, peace train. Hey, yes, it's the peace train.